Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really diving into a question that's, well, it's challenging, isn't it? What causes homosexuality?
It really is, and it's multifaceted.
Exactly. Our source today is a YouTube video transcript, and it's compelling because it offers some, frankly, surprising insights, but maybe raises even more questions. It's definitely a unique perspective.
For sure.
So our mission, as always, is to pull out those key nuggets of knowledge, the surprising bits from this specific source, and help you navigate its complexities.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial right from the start to acknowledge how sensitive and intricate this topic is. We'll be focusing on what this source claims we know,
right,
and maybe even more importantly, what it admits we don't know. It's about looking at it critically, questioning assumptions, especially given, it's a YouTube video transcript.
Absolutely. So let's jump right in. The source tackles a big one straight away. The myth of the gay gene.
Ah, yes.
It's pretty blunt. It says the gay gene does not exist, and there's, quote, no evidence to suggest it does, just dismisses it up front.
It does. And after getting that out of the way, the source really zeroes in on one potential cause, prenatal testosterone, PNT.
PNT.
Okay.
Yeah.
It quickly adds it's not that simple, calls it a wild thing to go into. So it flags the complexity immediately.
And what I found fascinating was how it talked about measuring this PNT in adults. I mean, you can't directly measure what happened in the womb years later, right? So how do they do it?
That's a great point. The source talks about proxies, indirect measures. The first one is the finger ratio.
Finger ratio.
Yeah, the ratio between your index and ring finger. Apparently, a, quote, long ring finger to an index finger is heavily correlated to testosterone exposure while you're in the womb.
Really?
Yeah, and it notes that typically women tend to have shorter ones than men, so it's like this little biological echo.
Wow. Okay. An echo from the past. What else?
The second proxy mentioned is the facial width to height ratio, measuring from the top of the eyes to the lips. And a wider face, on average, supposedly indicates even higher levels of prenatal testosterone exposure than average.
Right.
And the source finds it fascinating that this apparently holds true for other species too, like apes.
Apes?
Yeah, suggesting you could potentially, quote, predict where an ape will land in the hierarchy simply by the face alone because it predicts things such as dominance and aggression.
That's quite a claim, linking face shape to hierarchy based on PNT.
Okay, so if PNT is the main focus, what about other hormones? Like, does estrogen play a role according to this source?
Good question. The source is very clear on this. It says there's absolutely zero correlation between estrogen and homosexuality, claims it only has to do with testosterone.
Only testosterone?
Yeah, the view presented is that testosterone and the lack of testosterone both really have much stronger impacts on your development, who you are as a person, your personality, your temperament, all that stuff. That's a strong statement. But how direct is the link the source actually makes between this prenatal testosterone and homosexuality itself? It sounds like it might get a bit muddy.
Oh, it definitely does. It's a real mixed bag, according to the source. It says, yes, many studies find that it is due to higher levels of testosterone exposure in the womb.
Okay, so there's support for that idea.
But then immediately it says there are lots of other studies that find different and conflicting things or just find nothing correlating to this at all.
Right.
Some sources apparently claim nothing to do with prenatal testosterone. Others suggest lower levels. So it's all over the place.
So higher levels, lower levels, no link.
Exactly. The source says the general consensus is that it has to do with higher levels. But then it admits it's confusing because lower amounts may also have an effect. Well, it points to research in other species where higher testosterone leads to male typical behavior and lower leads to more female typical development. And the source itself says, quote, this confuses the hell out of me. Why is it that higher levels lead to homosexuality but lower levels more feminine behavior?
Yeah, that is a head-scratcher, the source points out. It really shows how messy these biological links can seem. Okay, so beyond hormones, the source also talks about personality and even brain difference.
It does. On personality, it claims that homosexuals tend to have more feminine personalities and temperaments and behavior. It cites things like higher levels of agreeableness and openness.
Based on studies.
Well, it cites those traits, but then adds this sort of anecdotal remark. We don't even need studies to know this to be true if you've ever talked to a homosexual. It's easy to spot many of, which is, a pretty broad general presented as fact.
Yeah, that's definitely leaning heavily on observation there.
It is. Then it mentions physical traits, like naturally higher pitches and tones in the voices of many gay men, even when they're not trying to sound gay.
Okay.
And it connects that higher pitch voice to lower testosterone, which, again, as the source notes, seems to contradict the main PNT theory suggesting higher testosterone. It's another point of...
Right, adding to the puzzle. What about behavior?
It mentions childhood behavior, things like toys, playmates, and activity preferences being linked to adult sexual orientation. It says non-heterosexual people often recall higher levels of cross-gender behavior in child.
Okay, that's something often discussed. And then it moves on to the brain itself, neurological differences.
Yeah, this is where the source makes some pretty big claims about neurological differences and distinctly feminine brains in homosexuals, specifically looking at what it calls
neuropathways. How does it describe them?
It gives this simplified model where a typical man go up and down the pathways. That is, they are not connected between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere.
Okay. It's simplistic maybe, but okay.
And for women, it claims, the pathways go back and forth, indicating a much stronger connection between both sides of the brain.
And the significance of that, according to the source.
Well, the source argues this is why women are better at verbalizing their emotions than men and are also better at multitasking, while men are supposedly better at honing in on one thing and have better spatial awareness. Like a hunter, it says.
Big generalizations there based on this pathway.
Very much so. And the source concludes this part by stating, homosexuals tend to have more feminine brains than heterosexuals. Again, it's important to stress this is the source's interpretation of complex neuroscience.
Understood. So we've got PNT, conflicting studies, personality traits, voice pitch, brain pathways. After all that, does the source actually land on a definitive cause? It feels like there are still huge gaps.
Absolutely. And the source is surprisingly upfront about that. It says, despite hours of research, it has a lot of things I just don't know. And it explicitly states the video is by no means to say we have a definite cause for why people are gay.
Okay, so it admits the uncertainty.
Definitely. It then asks the big question, is homosexuality entirely biological? And its answer is not. It argues biology plays a large role, but it is not the only thing.
Right, so it's opening the door to other factors. What specifically still confuses the source about the biological side?
Several things. One, it mentions extremely masculine gays. How do they fit the theories presented?
Good point.
Two, the huge overlap problem. It says tons and tons of other things are also linked to prenatal testosterone, also such as transsexuals, masculine women, lesbians, bisexual men and women, feminine men, criminals, pedophiles, people, even with autism.
Wow, that's a massive list linked to the same potential factor.
It is, which leads to the source's core question. What causes the different outputs? Why gay instead of trans or just a feminine man or, any of these other things?
Makes sense. If PNT affects all these things, what makes the outcome different?
Exactly. And it also notes it couldn't find biological differences, based on its research, between a feminine homosexual and a biological male that is transsexual. It says they are exactly the same from what I can.
Okay, so lots of biological confusion remaining.
Yep.
And this is where, correct me if I'm wrong, the source really starts to pivot towards the environment.
That's exactly right. This is a major turn. The source concludes it's leaning towards that there's a strong possibility that the environment plays a significant role. It suggests a combination of nature and nurture.
Nature and nurture. How does it illustrate that environmental influence?
It uses some animal examples. First, sparrows. If you remove the mother sparrow, the young male will imprint on its father instead, and as a result, that male sparrow will only mate with other male sparrows.
Interesting. And it stresses.
It stresses this is not on a biological level. It's about imprinting, an environmental factor. Then it gives an example with sheep and goats.
Sheep and goats.
Yeah, a male sheep raised only in a flock of goats, it will only mate with female goats. And female sheep raised that way will mate with both male goats and male sheep.
So cross-species attraction based on upbringing.
Right. And again, the source emphasizes this, shows sexuality can be changed in the animal kingdom, not on a biological level. It has nothing to do with biology or genetics.
So what's the big takeaway the source wants us to get from these animal studies? It sounds like it's challenging a simple narrative.
Absolutely. It uses these examples to, quote, break this delusion, this idea that you're simply born on a biological level with a different sexuality. There's more to it. It is not that simple. It really pushes back against a purely biological determinism.
Okay, so biology plays a role, but environment is crucial too, maybe even allowing for change, according to these examples.
Mm-hmm.
This then leads the source into, well, a very controversial area, conversion therapy, or SOCE as it calls it.
Yeah, sexual orientation change efforts. And the source definitely acknowledges the controversy. It mentions that many people report horror experiences, often involving things like electric therapy.
Right, which is widely condemned.
Exactly. But it also says others report positive experiences and that they change their sexual orientation. It's presenting both sides of the anecdotal reports it found.
And then it focuses on a specific study.
It does. A 2021 analysis, it says, of 125 men that were in SOCE. And it makes a point of saying this study includes psychotherapy. Don't worry, there aren't any electric chairs. It's trying to separate this from the more extreme historical practice.
Okay, so psychotherapy-based SEE. What did this particular study find, according to the source?
Well, it reported some specific numbers. Same-sex attraction went down from their initial 5.7 reporting to a 4.1 on the Kinsey scale. Kinsey scale.
Kinsey scale, right. 0 to 6, so a noticeable drop.
A drop, yeah. And a reduction in same-sex activity at a 2.4 to a 1.5. It also stated that between 45% and 69% of participants experience at least partial reduction of unwanted same sexuality.
Partial reduction. What about a full change?
The source says a full reduction of attraction was somewhat low at 14%, but 26% for full-on sexual behavior. So higher for behavior change than attraction change.
And did it mention negative effect? Were people moving the other way?
It did. It notes that 4 to 10% of participants experienced increased same-sex orientation after SOCE.
Increased, okay.
And regarding negative effects, it quotes figures suggesting from 8% to 4.8% of participants reported a mark of severe negative psychological change. But then for positive effects, it quotes 12.1 to 61.3 reported marked or severe positive.
So it's a wide range for positive effects, much larger than the negative ones reported in this sample.
According to the source's presentation of this study, yes. It states the net change was significantly positive for all problem domains and concludes that for this specific group, SOCE was perceived as effective and safe therapeutic practice by this sample of participants.
But it included a disclaimer, right?
Crucially, yes. It adds this study is not to be used for broad generalizations. That's important context.
Definitely. So given the controversy, the limited sample, the disclaimer, what does the source ultimately want us, the listeners, to take away from presenting this study?
Well, the source's interpretation is that this study supports the idea of a certain level of environmental aspects to it, even in homosexuality. It sees it as showing orientation can be changed quite a bit with overwhelmingly positive effects for those who desire change.
For those who desire it.
Yes. It explicitly says it's not saying we should force anyone to do this, but argues for those who want to change. These studies show it works. If you're unhappy with the way you are, why shouldn't you be able to change that if you can?
Okay, that's the argument it's making.
And then it makes a very provocative comparison. It argues if you support transsexuals transitioning to be what they want, then by that same logic, you should support this since it works and it's not harmful.
That's comparing SOCE to gender transition support.
Yes, and it dismisses concerns about harm from practices like electric therapy as overblown by people and compares potential harms across different procedures, calling it just a matter of perspective. It's a highly opinionated stance presented at the end there.
Wow, okay. Definitely a lot to process there, particularly that final section. So let's try to sort of wrap our heads around this. After this deep dive into this one particular source, it's crystal clear that the question, what causes homosexuality, is anything but simple.
Absolutely not. It's this complex blend, isn't it? Biological predispositions like that prenatal testosterone idea constantly interacting with potential environmental influences.
Yeah, the source really paints a picture of this dynamic interplay. It's not straightforward at all.
And I think the main takeaway from this source isn't a single answer. It's more about the complexity itself. You know, PNT seems like a strong biological thread.
Right.
But then it gets tangled up with all those other potential outcomes, trans identity, personality traits, even autism, according to the source. And then you have the environmental factors, those animal examples, challenging the purely biological view.
It really forces you to look at the whole picture, the whole ecosystem of influences.
Exactly.
Which leaves us and you with a final thought to maybe chew on.
If,
as this source suggests, even deeply personal aspects of who we are, like sexual orientation, might be influenced by this interplay of biology and environment, well, what does that imply about other aspects of our identity, our personalities, our beliefs? What does it suggest about our capacity for choice, for change, or even about the very nature of identity itself?
That's definitely something to think about long after this deep dive ends.